arka indra agni, sorry, yo arkendavagni indra vayunam. Yo arkendavagni indra vayunam. Yamadharma prachetasam. Yamadharma prachetasam. Rupani sthana adhaishe. Rupani sthana adhaishe. Tasmai shuklayate namaha. Tasmai shuklayate namaha. Yo arkendavagni indra vayunam. Yamadharma prachetasam. Rupani sthana adhaishe. Tasmai shuklayate namaha. Yo arkendavagni indra vayunam. Yamadharma prachetasam. Rupani sthana adhaishe. Tasmai shuklayate namaha. Someone would like to... Yo arkendavagni indra vayunam. Yamadharma prachetasam. Rupani sthana adhaishe. Tasmai shuklayate namaha. Yo arkendavagni indra vayunam. Yamadharma prachetasam. Rupani sthana adhaishe. Tasmai shuklayate namaha. Yo arkendavagni indra vayunam. Yamadharma prachetasam. Rupani sthana adhaishe. Tasmai shuklayate namaha. Mataji's. Yo arkendavagni indra vayunam. Yamadharma prachetasam. Rupani sthana adhaishe. Tasmai shuklayate namaha. Yaha, you who, Arka, of the sun, Indu, of the moon, Agni, of Agni, the fire god, Indra, of Indra, the Lord of heaven, Vayunam, of Vayu, the wind god, Yama, of Yama, the god of punishment, Dharma, of Dharma, the god of piety, Prachetasam, and of Varuna, the god of the waters, Rupani, the forms, Sthane, when necessary, Adatse, you assume, Tasmai, unto him, Shuklaya, unto Lord Vishnu, Te, unto you, Namaha, obeisances. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Translation. You assume, when necessary, the part of the sun god, the moon god, Agni, the god of fire, Indra, the lord of paradise, Vayu, the wind god, Yama, the god of punishment, Dharma, the god of piety, and Varuna, the god presiding over the waters. All obeisances unto you, who are none other than Lord Vishnu. Purport. Since the sage Kardama was a Brahmana and Swayambhuva was a Kshatriya, the sage was not supposed to offer obeisances to the king, because socially his position was greater than the king's. But he offered his obeisances to Swayambhuva Manu, because as Manu, king and emperor, he was the representative of the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord is always worshipable, regardless of whether one is a Brahmana, a Kshatriya, or a Shudra. As a representative of the Supreme Lord, the king deserved respectful obeisances from everyone. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamhayyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradhayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvashe Namaha Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I seek the blessings of all the assembled Vaishnavas here, both present personally and online, so that I may properly present Srila Prabhupada's purports in glorification of Shri Shri Radha Gopinath. So we're actually entering a very special section of the Srimad Bhagavatam because the focus of this section is the conversation between Kardama Muni and Devahuti. That will occupy about 7 or so chapters towards the end of the 3rd canto. What is being described here is the beginning of that conversation, so to speak, where the marriage of Mother Devahuti with Sage Kardama is about to be initiated. As the devotees may have heard, Devahuti was attracted to Kardama's qualities simply by hearing about them. She had heard about them, I believe, from Narada. And hearing about his qualities, both material and spiritual, because Devahuti was someone who was incredibly Krishna conscious. She wanted somebody whom she could respect and follow. And hearing about Kardama's qualities, she had not met him, she had not seen him. Just hearing about his qualities, she felt like, here is somebody I can actually dedicate my life to, serving, assisting, learning from, and growing in life with. So hearing about Kardama, she expressed the desire tacitly to her parents. I believe through her mother, she expressed it to her father. So Swayambhuva Manu, because he was the well-wisher of every living entity, he was the emperor of the world, And that included, of course, his daughter. He was his daughter's personal father. So he came here not so much as an emperor, but he came here as a father. He came to see Kardama. Now, of course, Manu and Kardama are both sons of Lord Brahma, and they're both exalted personalities. They've both been given very specific services in Brahma's creation. Brahma's instruction to Kardama had been, please help me populate the universe. Please have children. And Kardama Muni had spent considerable amount of time. The Srimad Bhagavatam says 10,000 celestial years. So in comparison, that is 1 full year of our time equals a day and night of celestial time, demigod time. So 10,000 of those celestial years was what Kardama Muni spent in absorbed in worshipping the Supreme Lord. And as a result of his worship, Krishna had personally appeared before Kardama and offered him a benediction. He said, what you want, the kind of wife you're looking for who will be supportive to both your spiritual life and help you fulfill your material desires, that person exists. That person is Devahuti, the daughter of Swayambhuva Manu. And within a few days, Swayambhuva Manu will come here and he will present you with his daughter, Devahuti. So as soon as Swayambhuva Manu came before Kardama, Kardama actually knew what the purpose of Swayambhuva Manu's visit was, because Krishna had told him this personally. It is also a fact that an exalted personality directly communes with Krishna from within the heart. And so such exalted personalities know the purpose of somebody's visit. An example is Srila Haridas Thakur, who was already aware of why the prostitute who was coming to allure him was coming to him. He was aware of it beforehand. He only stayed back to help purify her. But exalted personalities who are directly in communion with the Lord are aware of circumstances that are going to happen or may happen around them. But when Swayambhuva Manu came, the previous verses describe that he first offered obeisances from a distance. Then he came closer and he actually touched the feet of Kardama in respectful obeisances, because Kardama Muni was acting in a spirit of renunciation. He had completely 100% dedicated his life to the worship and service of the Lord. Swayambhuva Manu was no less, but as a devotee who could appreciate the austerity, but more importantly, the bhakti of another devotee, who could appreciate the service of an exalted Vaishnava, he came and he offered respectful obeisances. He recognized Kardama Muni as being his superior, not just socially, but even in terms of advancement. He offered obeisances to Kardama from a distance. Then he came closer and personally touched Kardama's feet. When he personally came and touched Kardama's feet, Kardama Muni picked him up and embraced him. So this is described in the previous verse, or in the verse just prior to this, in text number 48. And Kardama Muni's reciprocation was filled with Vaishnava etiquette. As soon as his feet were touched, he picked him up, embraced him. He offered some water for Manu to wash his legs. He offered a seat made of durva grass. And Swayambhuva Manu seated himself comfortably on the grass. Kardama Muni then offered him arhanam, is the phrase used. So this is in text 49. Grihita arhanam. So this is not this verse. We are talking 2 verses later. Grihita arhanam means that Swayambhuva Manu offered him a plate. Like, in Vedic culture, when a guest comes to the home, or even when we are coming to greet the Supreme Lord, we have a plate with some fruits and flowers and some water, certain paraphernalia. So that's the kind of thali that Kardama Muni offered to Swayambhuva Manu. Swayambhuva Manu accepted this arhanam. Of course, he washed his feet, he sat down, and he just was silent. Being in a subordinate position, he was, if you'd like, he presented himself at Kardama Muni's service, and he waited for Kardama Muni to initiate the conversation. Now, Kardama Muni Himself, in turn, he greeted Swayambhuva Manu as another respected Vaishnava. He saw that here is somebody who himself is absorbed in the service of the Lord. And in 7 verses, he greets Swayambhuva Manu with tremendous affection and respect. There is simultaneously respect and intimacy in this exchange. These exchanges are real. They're not superficial Haribol exchanges. Haribol Prabhu, how are you? You want to talk something business? Okay, come, let's sit down. That's not so much the mood with which the conversation was approached. The conversation, in fact, the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the 5th canto, it is mentioned that if a guest comes home, even if they're uninvited, if somebody does not welcome them by giving them something to eat, at least give them a glass of water, or if one doesn't even have that, greeting them with sweet words, then one is surely destined for a hellish destination. But it is a pillar of Vedic etiquette that when a guest, especially an honored guest, comes home, one should be prepared to serve that guest with whatever one has. So according to what Kardama Muni had, he prepared and offered Swayambhuva Manu the right kind of paraphernalia, and he began to greet him with very sweet words that are described across 7 verses. And what we're about to describe, what we're about to speak now, is the second of those 7 verses. In Kardama Muni's speech, he is glorifying Swayambhuva Manu's qualities. Because Swayambhuva Manu, when offering obeisances, he had glorified Kardama Muni in the following words. This is not directly described in Srimad Bhagavatam. It is described that he offered prayers. But what he specifically said is, it is my great fortune, it is my incredible fortune that I'm having darshan of a person like you, whose form is completely made of austerity. And your form is blazing with effulgence that comes from being absorbed in the Supreme Lord, from living a life that is dedicated to the Supreme Lord. And you see that in one of the previous purports, Srila Prabhupada comments on, this is text number 47, Srila Prabhupada comments on how a life dedicated to the service of the Lord, especially a life which is completely devoid of other engagements, allows one's entire features to reflect that kind of absorption. One's very facial features, one's demeanor, everything blazes with happiness, with contentment, with fulfillment, and with energy. And that was what Swayambhuva Manu had seen. Appreciating this quality of Kardama Muni, he had said, it is my great fortune that I get to see this. I get to see you whose form is the very form of austerity, whose form is filled with the effulgence that comes from worshipping the Supreme Lord. Kardama Muni replied in appropriate terms. And the essence of what he has said is, it is my fortune that I get to see you who are who represent the protective energy of the Supreme Lord. From each of the limbs of the Supreme Lord comes a type of personality. From the Lord's hands come the Kshatriyas, who come to protect with the strength of their own arms, who come to represent the Lord and protect people by the strength of their arms, which comes from the Lord. So Kardama Muni, he praises Swayambhuva Manu as being the very limbs of the Supreme Lord. He praises him as embodying this protective energy of the Lord and protecting everybody in the world. And Prabhupada, in another context, is careful to explain that this does not just refer to people of a specific designation, like human beings in a certain country. He is the emperor of the world. And praja includes human beings, and it includes trees, it includes animals. It is Swayambhuva Manu's duty to ensure that every one of these individual creatures or human beings or living entities receive the protection, the facilitation, and the care that they individually need. In this particular verse, that is the subject of today's class, the specific praise offered by Kardama is that the king, or Swayambhuva Manu, he is so qualified that he is properly representing the demigods who are themselves representatives of the Supreme Lord. And there are 8 demigods featured in this verse. Arka refers to the sun, Indu refers to the moon, Agni refers to fire, Indra is of course the king or the CEO, if you'd like, of the demigods. Vayu is the god of prana, who ensures that both prana within the body and within the universe is moving and is operating properly. Yama is the deity who handles punishment or who handles reward for the appropriate kind of pious or impious activity. Dharma is the personality who protects the righteous. You have that saying, Dharma rakshati rakshita, that those who protect Dharma are protected by Dharma in turn. So those who are naturally follow religious principles, they find that sometimes in English you say, the truth is behind me, or the truth will protect me. There's that saying in English, and that's what this means. That Dharma protects those, he gives them strength, he gives them victory in the end, those who are righteous. And Prachetasam here refers to Varuna as the son of the Prachetas. But Varuna is the god of the waters. And it's interesting to ask, why, for example, the king is compared to these individual personalities. There's a specific quality from each of these demigods that the king has to embody. The word embody is actually used in this verse. It's called adatshe. Adatse, actually. Adatse. Datse means to embody or to accept. Adatse means to completely embody and accept. This is an indication of Swayambhuva Manu's extraordinary qualification. And the phrase here is sthana. Sthana means according to time, place, and circumstances, as appropriate. It is not that the king maintained just, one kind of quality at one particular time. When the quality was necessary to be shown, he showed it as appropriate according to the time, place, and circumstance, and he completely embodied these qualities which come from the Supreme Lord, which are appropriate for a person of his service in protecting every living entity. So the term Arka, why is Arka used? Arka refers to the sun. The sun's splendor, its ability to light up the world, its ability to provide vision and direction is referenced here. The king has to, with his own presence, be that beacon of light, and his majesty needs to be able to provide direction, vision, and light for his subjects. That is why the sun is being referenced here. Indu refers to the moon. And Indu, it's very, very pleasing. It's very cooling. And the moon is very attractive. That's usually how people identify with the moon. You go out onto the night stroll, you feel very calm, peaceful, and it's very attractive. You want to look at the moon. You can't look at the sun. It's blazing with effulgence, but you can look at the moon. And sometimes you say the Lord's moon-like face. And it is described, for example, in Ayodhya, that the devotees would just come and they would just want to see the Lord because he was so attractive. And they couldn't stop seeing the Lord. It was like they were drinking nectar. Sometimes the devotees there are compared to Chataka birds who just keep drinking the nectar from the cloud. That's how they would drink the nectar coming from the Lord's lotus face or moon-like face. So the king has to embody this particular quality. So the moon, therefore, refers to yasha, or famous, being famous, by his attractive personality, by the sweetness of his dealings with others. He provides that cooling shelter where people are just attracted. He becomes famous for being like a father, for being like a protector, for being like an intimate friend to all his subjects. Therefore, the moon is being referenced here. Agni here refers to being invincible, that there's nobody who can conquer him, because the nature of Agni is that it burns everything to ashes, and it can conquer everything. So the king embodies this spirit and this quality of Agni. And just for reference, each of these qualities come from the Supreme Lord himself. Indra, this quality here as the chief of the demigods, his principal quality is his prowess, his power, his opulence, his might. And the king, so the difference between the sun and Indra, sun is splendor, vision, direction, whereas Indra is power. And of course, Agni is invincibility. They're slightly different qualities. Vayu refers to the prana, the Lord of prana. And just as prana is within our body and outside our body, it's within everything. And nobody notices its presence. The king is also similarly supposed to be so aware of what's happening everywhere in the world that he's both within and without. It's almost like that. People's hearts, people's houses, situations. He should be aware of what's going on. It is not proper for a ruler to say that, I'm sorry, I was ignorant of something going wrong in the kingdom. That is not an acceptable response for a leader or for a ruler. And as we are going through each of these qualities, we are going to reference very shortly a section of the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where in context of Prithu Maharaj's qualities, these qualities are explained in more detail. What we're also wanting to keep in mind is this. When our leaders, like the GBC, for example, they meet up, often the kind of verses they discuss for contemplation in terms of what their service as a leader should entail, they contemplate and speak of these qualities, which are reflected in the verses associated with Prithu Maharaj. So when we're going through these qualities, we can keep in our mind, in our respective positions as leaders in different services, whether it could be as simple a thing as being a leader at home, leader in our workplace, leader in a community, leader in the temple society, a temple president, or another service. We actually do have the ability to affect people's lives. And this simultaneous ability of, for example, being able to provide vision, direction, and at the same time be able to comfort and provide soothing affection to our dependents is an important combination for leaders to have. So that's one contemplation that we can have. So Vayunam. So the best explanation of this Vayunam is actually given by Chanakya Pandit in his Niti Shastra. Chanakya Pandit there describes an extensive network of spies and he describes in such intricate detail, for example, how one's minister should be chosen. He describes the level of independence that's required for that kind of position, the kind of intelligence that one needs to gather in order to choose that particular person. He describes the kind of espionage that is required to choose one's chief minister, and even the kind of espionage that is required to surround one's harem, so to speak, where one's wives are. Just because each of these places, when one is in power, it is very, very easy and possible for enemies to enter in and infiltrate. As we have seen throughout history in many, many circumstances, one's nearest and dearest advisors or one's personal family, it is possible for members of opposing either dynasties or opposing kingdoms or some kind of disturbing element to infiltrate. It is the very nature of position to attract envy, very nature of position to attract people who want to harm one, even if one is loved by the majority. This is the very nature of leadership. It happens to Krishna, and so therefore, any person who's taking this leadership position, there will always be people who disagree. There will always be people who feel like they can do better. But Vayunam describes that network of espionage the king establishes to make sure he's aware of something even before it happens. Not just for his own personal protection, but also to make sure that everyone in the kingdom is appropriately and properly placed and situated. It's also for this reason that traditionally, not just in Vedic culture, but even if you look at other dynasties, like older kingdoms, you find that kings would actually disguise themselves and go out into the public. If, for example, this is described in the Ottoman Empire, it's also described in the Mughal kingdom, where Akbar would disguise himself and he would go out into the street. So this is described there. Yama refers to the quality of being able to punish, to instill fear into those who are miscreants. The word Yama, the moment you say that you'll be punished by Yamaraj for your sins, for pious people, there's an amount of fear that is generated. Now, the king is the embodiment of Yama in this world. And the moment, for example, the subsequent verses would describe, the moment, for example, the king's voice would raise in anger, then people would start trembling. And that's the kind of power he needs to have. When the king does anybody conscious of the kind of sound that a bow would make when it was strung and the string released? It was described that for Arjuna, for example, it was like two mountains clashing together. The sound would shake the ground and the vibration would go from earth to sky. Sometimes just by the sound of the string, one could identify the bow. The bows that the kings used were so famous. They had a very distinctive sound. And the kind of vibration they produced, people would know, oh my God, this personality is coming. I better get my act together. And even hearing like the king's army go through, one becomes scared. I don't know how many of us have experienced this, but if one is like, for example, driving too fast, a police car comes by, there's a sense of fear that is instilled. And so the king also needs to be able to instill this kind of fear in people in general. Otherwise, it is just part of rebellious, conditioned soul's nature to degrade into more selfish or rule-breaking habits if that kind of fear is not present. And the king embodies this. A king who just sits in a kingdom and forgets about these details and these qualities in managing the kingdom is a king who is soon to fail. And you see this in a lot of the European empires and even the Indian kings. In one of these qualities, they've failed, which is why they've been ousted from their position. And kings in general no longer actually have any real ruling power in this world. Dharma we've spoken of. He needs to be able to protect the righteous. And those who are in the right, they have every right to come to the king and say, why did this happen? Why did we have no rain this year? Why has my child died? Well, it was actually interesting. One time, Prabhupada, it was 1970 somewhere, and a news article had come in a Bombay newspaper, which stated that the citizens of India, of Bombay, had gone to the chief minister complaining there was no rain. They considered it to be the chief minister's fault. When I heard this, I was like, this sounds rather primitive. Prabhupada's comment was, he said, Indians have still not forgotten their culture. He said, and this was actually an eye-opening revelation for me. He said, the ruler is completely responsible for everything that happens in the kingdom. If there's insufficient rain, it's the ruler's problem. If there is like thieving or stealing, somebody's child dies prematurely. The king has not ensured the proper level of piety in the kingdom. It is the king's fault. It is the leader's fault. Therefore, the king gets 1/6 of the sins that is distributed to the population. And Prabhupada said, so I'm glad that they have not yet forgotten their culture. But so everybody had the right, if something went wrong in the kingdom, to personally and directly go before the king and get justice. So therefore, he has to embody dharma, protecting the righteous. And prachetasam Varuna. This is an interesting one. Varuna refers to the god of the waters. So within the sea, it is very, very deep. It is very secret. What goes into the sea doesn't come out very easily. And also the sea is a repository of great treasures. Oil, a lot of oil comes from the sea nowadays, plus there are a lot of jewels and hidden treasures that are traditionally been found in the oceans. So the sea embodies hidden wealth and hidden intentions. Some people say, you need a very open ruler. In some sense, yes, but in another sense, if the king has to organize a plan, for example, he needs to remove certain disturbing elements. He needs to be able to act with the element of surprise so that they don't come to know. In this sense, he needs to be able to coordinate a secret agenda to remove disturbing elements and re-establish order. An example of this is like in India, when Modi announced the invasion of Kashmir, it was very spontaneous. Or he changed the currency, it just happened like overnight, practically speaking. So a hidden agenda is sometimes necessary to remove disturbing elements, and a king needs to be expert in doing this. We're now going to reference the same qualities as described in Prithu Maharaj, but the important point to note in this entire conversation is why someone like Swayambhuva Manu actually possessed these qualities. The thing is that a person who's completely absorbed in service to the Lord, it is not like they're just passive individuals. When one is truly absorbed in devotional service to the Lord, the best of one's personality comes to the fore. This is actually based on an analogy described in Kapiladev's own teachings to Mother Devahuti, and I think it comes in either the 25th or 29th chapter of this same canto. So the analogy that is described is this. When you eat something, what is useful for the body is digested and assimilated within the body. But what is not useful is taken and thrown away. Similarly, when one is in devotional service, each one of us have different personalities. Some of us are naturally talented, for example, at coordinating and managing things. Some of us may be naturally studious or able to absorb a lot of information and present it in a certain way. Others have, other kinds of skills and attributes, and every one of us has the opportunity to serve Krishna in a very unique way. And everybody has a talent. Every single one of us has a unique talent that we can use in Krishna's service. What devotional service does is not just, everybody doesn't just become like one cookie cutter type person. Devotional service brings out the best of one's personality. It removes those elements that are governed by ignorance and passion, and every one of our personalities has a part of us that can go into that deep, dark place. And for each of us, that's different. Devotional service removes that from us, and it brings our personality to the best that it can be in Krishna's service. And more so, the devotee learns not to identify themselves with those skills and attributes and those qualities, knowing that internally they're a servant of Krishna. So their material personality comes to the fore in the best possible light and is used in a completely non-egoistic way, in a mood of service for the Vaishnavas, for Radha Gopinath, for people in general. Swayambhuva Manu was already a person who had these qualities. You naturally see people who are very powerful, who can provide direction, but right now it is misguided. If they can come to devotional service and genuinely become absorbed in the Lord, it is not the same thing as, for example, somebody coming in, practicing some devotional service and maintaining the rest of their material personality. Then you will get good and bad. But when one actually becomes absorbed in the service of the Lord and becomes a properly situated devotee, you see the best of qualities present in this person that sustain even in difficult circumstances. Generally speaking, outside you do see qualities, but those qualities can break down when there is a disturbing circumstance. A person who's genuinely devoted to the Lord could be in this tradition or in any tradition. If one genuinely has a relationship with the Lord, the best of one's personality, which is a gift from the Lord, it comes to the fore in a manner that is suitable for service to the Lord, suitable for service to the Vaishnavas and for people in general. Therefore, it is described, Dhira Dhira Jana Priya Karao, Nirmatsara Pujito. Such a devotee is dear to both those who are sober and who are not sober. Sober here meaning that they're aware of the temporary nature of life, that they're a servant of the Lord. And to not be sober means to be completely caught up in this world. For both kinds of persons, such a devotee, such a person whose personality has become the best it can be, that person is dear. So now we're going to just reference Prithu Maharaj's section. It's very interesting, and I just request you to just monitor the verse and see how similar it is to this comparison of the sun, the moon, Agni, Indra, etc. So this comes in the 16th chapter of the 4th canto. And it's a situation where Prithu Maharaj has just made his appearance from King Vena's body, and the Brahmanas are praising him. So I'm going to start reading from text number 4. This king, Maharaj Prithu, is the best among those who are following religious principles. As such, he will engage everyone in the pursuit of religious principles and give those principles all protection. He will be a great chastiser to the irreligious and atheistic. So here, for example, his presence as the sun, as protector of Dharma, of Yama is described. Text 5. This king alone in his own body will be able in due course of time to maintain all living entities and keep them in a pleasant condition by manifesting himself as different demigods to perform various departmental activities. Thus, he will maintain the upper planetary system by inducing the populace to perform the Vedic sacrifices. In due course of time, he will also maintain this earthly planet by discharging proper rainfall. Text number 6. This King Prithu will be as powerful as the sun god. And just as the sun god equally distributes his sunshine to everyone, King Prithu will distribute his mercy equally. Similarly, just as the sun god evaporates water for 8 months and during the rainy season returns it profusely, this king will also exact taxes from the citizens and return those monies in times of need. Text number 7. This King Prithu will be very, very kind to all citizens, even though a poor person may trample over the king's head by violating the rules and regulations. The king, out of his causeless mercy, will be forgetful and forgiving. As a protector of the world, he will be as tolerant as the earth itself. So he's representing the demigod earth here in this verse. Text number 8. When there is no rainfall and the citizens are in great danger due to the scarcity of water, this royal personality of Godhead will be able to supply rains exactly like the heavenly king Indra. Thus, he will very easily be able to protect the citizens from drought. 9. This king Maharaj Prithu, by virtue of his affectionate glances and beautiful moon-like face, which is always smiling with great affection for the citizens, will enhance everyone's peaceful life. It is very challenging actually if you have someone very powerful as a ruler and they're frowning and angry all the time. You need a combination of someone who's powerful and affectionate. Then you actually want to follow them. 10. So actually sometimes people would comment with Prabhupada also. Prabhupada was very powerful, but he was very, very affectionate. And it was that affection that really captured the devotees. Sometimes Prabhupada would also say, you need the courage of an English gentleman and the heart of a Bengali mother, Prabhupada would sometimes say. Text number 10. The reciters continued, this is Varuna, no one will be able to understand the policies that the king will follow. His activities will also be very confidential, and it will not be possible for anyone to know how he will make every activity successful. His treasury will always remain unknown to everyone. He will be the reservoir of unlimited good qualities and glories. His position will be maintained and covered just as Varuna, the deity of the seas, is covered all around by water. King Prithu was born of the dead body of King Vena as fire is produced from arani wood. Thus King Prithu will always remain just like fire, and his enemies will not be able to approach him. Indeed, he will be unbearable to his enemies, for although staying very near him, they will never be able to approach him, but will have to remain as if far away. No one will be able to overcome the strength of King Prithu. King Prithu will be able to see all the internal, this is Vayu, internal and external activities of every one of his citizens. Still, no one will be able to know his system of espionage, and he himself will remain neutral regarding all matters of glorification or vilification paid to him. He will be exactly like air. The life falls within the body, which is exhibited internally and externally, but is always neutral to all affairs. Text 13. Since this king will always remain on the path of piety, he will be neutral to both his son and the son of his enemy. If the son of his enemy is not punishable, he will not punish him. But if his own son is punishable, he will immediately punish him. That's Yama. 14. Just as the sun god expands his shining rays up to the Arctic region without impedance, the influence of King Prithu will cover all tracts of land up to the Arctic region and will remain undisturbed as long as he lives. 15. This king will please everyone by his practical activities, and all of his citizens will remain very satisfied. Because of this, the citizens will take great satisfaction in accepting him as their ruling king. So you get the point. So these qualities are often used to describe great leaders. And this is described for King Prithu. If you also look up, I brought the first canto also, because when Maharaj Parikshit appeared in the 12th chapter of the first canto, the astrologers were reading Maharaj Parikshit's qualities. And you hear of Maharaj Parikshit's qualities described in very similar terms. Because these qualities are what Krishna personally possesses. And when Krishna appears, Prabhupada says Krishna generally appears. He doesn't have to, but he generally appears in the family of Kshatriyas, because it is natural in the family of Kshatriyas to right wrongs and to protect those who are righteous. And so you see that someone like Sri Ramachandra personally exemplified these qualities. And a king is called Naradeva. It is interesting that the Srimad Bhagavatam, in a few verses prior, in text 48, the way it refers to Swayambhuva Manu in the context of these exchanges is Nradevam. Nar or Nir means human being. Deva means God. So literally, God among human beings. The king is directly the representative of the Supreme Lord. And you can see in the translation here, in text 51, that it is said, all obeisances unto you who are none other than Lord Vishnu. So Madhvacharya has a comment here. He says that this statement is made because the king personally represents the Supreme Lord. It's not that he is the Supreme Lord, but because he so much embodies the Lord's qualities and he presents the kind of protection that the Lord himself would provide. Such a king carrying Krishna in his heart is able to be what the Lord wants the living entities to have. He's able to be that and provide that for all living entities. Therefore, he's called Nradevam. In Vedic culture, when you have a ruler, sometimes people can ask, when you have a ruler like Dhritarashtra, why didn't people just kill him and remove him out of the way? The reason is that a person who's a representative of the Supreme Lord, you can't just throw him out. You will create a tremendous amount of disturbance. In extreme circumstances where the ruler really crossed certain lines, that is when steps were taken to remove them. And there are certain examples. King Vena is an example in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Then you have Hiranyaksha, Hiranyakashipu. Examples like this, where they seriously crossed a line. But as long as they could be guided or controlled in the path of righteous principles and forced to act on the platform of duty, such a person was still respected and offered obeisances to, because his service is so important and so difficult. It is very, very uncommon, in fact, for a person who is supposed to be in a position of leadership to manifest all of these qualities completely and appropriately at the right time. In Swayambhuva Manu's case, he was a devotee with the highest level of devotion to the Lord. So having that quality of devotion, it was not hard for him to maintain these qualities and do everything just as he had to do it. For many of us, though, we often become parents, we often become leaders of a bhakti vriksha or of a group of people or a temple president, etc., without necessarily ever thinking that we would be in this space. And it can be intimidating for individuals. It's for this reason many people hesitate to take on that kind of responsibility, even if it's a responsibility like becoming a father or a mother. But what one has to understand is that the reason Prithu Maharaj had these qualities, we spoke of the fact that he had bhakti. What that means is that he had the desire to serve in that way. Kardama Muni had the desire to serve. His qualities were manifested differently because his desire to serve appeared in a different manner. If one receives an instruction to serve in a particular way, or one is given a particular service, along with that service comes the empowerment to complete that service. And if one is able to genuinely pray and seek the Vaishnava's blessings, the blessings of one's spiritual master and of the Lord, and is acting for their pleasure, one finds surprisingly that the mantle of leadership or the mantle of any other position which requires certain qualities becomes easier and easier to wear. These qualities begin to manifest in the body of a person. Srila Prabhupada was, when he was in London, he commented to Yamuna Mataji that if you want to learn a skill, then you just have to pray. And the prayers were Om Agyanati Mirandasya and Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam. He said, before you start any service, you recite these prayers, you will be able to learn and do that service very well. And it might be that we don't know how to cook, we don't know how to lead, we don't know how to do a particular service. But a person who does not have the skills but has the deep desire, by Krishna's grace, will very quickly develop that capability to be able to perform that service properly. If one has the skills or something of the skills but does not have the desire, one may start out doing something good, but very quickly there will be elements in one's service that just slip away or drop away. And people whom one is supposed to be serving will be discontented. This tells us that the desire to serve and being very careful and conscientious in our service are the secret ingredients of success. We were recently, and I'll finish with this, in His Holiness Devamrita Maharaj's Vyas Puja. And in Maharaj's Vyas Puja, this was in Melbourne where Maharaj was personally present and he was speaking. And he said something very interesting. He said, so it's been over 50 years since I've been practicing devotional service. And he said, when I started, we had no idea of where devotional service would lead us. He said, in 69 I first saw the devotees, 71 I saw them again, and 72 I joined the ashram. So 72 May, he was finishing Yale. January 73, I think, he joined the ashram. And he joined just as a devotee, as a normal devotee, going on the street, doing service. 50 years later, you see the kind of responsibilities, the kind of tremendous impact that his service has had over so many long decades. It is not possible to predict what the desire to serve can empower one to do. So as long as Devamrita Maharaj continued, he began to describe the position of the Kanishta Adhikari. He said, see, a Kanishta, it is very normal that one's service is restricted in a particular plane. One has a particular idea, I want to serve in this way. So one comes to the temple and one serves the deities, and he joked, nowadays in ISKCON we need more Kanishta Adhikaris because the number of devotees to serve Radha Gopinath are quite less. Deity worship requires a lot more devotees. But he then said, what we actually need in the moment are devotees who are willing to advance to the stage of Madhyam Adhikaris, those whose ability to chant Krishna's names is very deep. Those whose ability to give and give this message to others is very deep. And he said, you need to actually desire this. When you desire this, when you come to this platform, you will see how much we can expand. He said, we are the first generation. We have taken up this torch. Now this torch needs to be passed on to others. And we, in our individual capacity, and this is my reflection, in our individual capacity, we may be small individuals, but if we can start from somewhere, according to who we are and our circumstances, we develop, as Swayambhuva Manu had, as Kardama had, this deep desire to serve. Krishna will bring out the very best in us, and will allow us to be an instrument of His grace, and will allow us to make an impact. But that desire to serve and being very conscientious in service is actually really important. And as one devotee told me, before Krishna makes you an atom bomb, He's going to make you an atom. Meaning that the desire to really become a selfless instrument in Krishna's service, devoid of personal ambition or personal desire, Krishna will make us that. Then He will make us into an atom bomb. So that's all I had to say on this verse. We have a few minutes. If the Vaishnavas would like to ask any questions, or if they have any comments or thoughts on this verse or this section, please.
Sorry. In the present time also we see Chief Minister, Prime Minister, they take oath, like things, but more material way of life. The king, Vitu Maharaj, they are more spiritual way of life.
Yes.
Is that the comparison?
Yes, I mean, these qualities are actually necessary, that are described here, are necessary to run a kingdom. So those who manifest these qualities are acting on the instructions of the Supreme Lord. Today, because people are not connected to the Supreme Lord, they don't have a reference point to know how to perform their service. This is not just leaders, it's even us. We don't know what it takes to be a husband, a wife, son, a student. We don't even have to go to managing society because we don't have a reference point. But in Vedic society, because everybody's connected to the Supreme Lord, everybody knows their position, their place, and they know what pleases Krishna in their service. And the orientation of Vedic culture is, no matter who I am, what I'm doing, I know what Krishna wants from me. I know the qualities that Krishna is pleased by. And for reference, this is described in the 7th canto Bhagavatam from chapters 11 to 15. For different orders and societies of life, what are the qualities expected? But if one understands not just like the details of the qualities, but the principles of those qualities, then one can please the Supreme Lord in one's position and service. The problem today, you're right, is that people don't have a reference point. So they may actually do a lot of things right, but because they don't have an anchor, there are also many things that they do wrong.
In a very distorted way, they keep following that thing, but in a very...
Yeah, it's mixed. At best, you get a mixture. At worst, you get people doing their own thing.
Yeah. They take an oath, like, I so-and-so, taking his name.
Yes, but I mean, we can also look at ourselves. We can think about society, and I sometimes think we prematurely go into contemplating what we can change in society, where we need to be thinking, because if we are not able to have an impact on society, the problem is with us. Before we can organize a house, we need to organize our own room. Before we organize the street, we need to organize our house. So it's important that we ourselves understand what Krishna wants from us. One time Prabhupada said, I can conquer the world in 18 days, but nobody's surrendering. But if